Whenever you think about Singapore and motorsport, you instantly think of the Singapore Grand Prix held under the dazzling lights at Marina Bay, which if not for COVID would have been held once again over 2 weekends ago, with this very stretch of tarmac serving as the start-finish straight for the 22nd Singapore Grand Prix. Now, you're probably thinking, hold on a minute, 22 races, but Formula 1 only started racing in Singapore in 2008, and the FIA regulations state that two races may not share the same name within a single season, which is why we ended up with the Austrian and Styrian Grand Prix instead of having two Austrian Grand Prix, meaning that from 2008 there could have only been 14 editions of the Singapore Grand Prix, and that's if you were to count 2020, which as we all know was also cancelled. So, just when and where were the other 8 mystery races held then? Well, those races were held right here on this very road that's been turned into a park connector on one side. This is Old Upper Thomson Road, which forms the twisty middle section of the Thomson Road Grand Prix Circuit, sometimes referred to as the Sembawang Circuit. From 1961 all the way to 1973, a total of 13 Grand Prix weekends was staged at this track, with the final 8 run as the Singapore Grand Prix, accounting for 8 missing races that I mentioned earlier. But now we have another 5 missing races, and you're probably wondering what they were called. Well, the very first race in 1961 was called the Orange Year Grand Prix, named after the Visit Singapore the Orange Year tourism campaign, while the 4 subsequent races were called the Malaysian Grand Prix. Though at the time, Singapore was still a self-governing state under the British Empire in 1962, this was done in anticipation of the formation of Malaysia in 1963, with Singapore becoming a state within the Federation, meaning that the Malaysian Grand Prix actually predates the declaration of the Malaysian Federation. But back to Singapore. In 1966, the race ran under the banner of the Singapore Grand Prix for the first time, with Singaporean driver Lee Han Seng winning the race in the Lotus 22, becoming just one of the 2 Singaporean drivers to ever win the Singapore Grand Prix, with the other driver being Rodney Xiao, who won the 1967 edition in a Merlin Mark X. By this time, it was fair to describe the race as a success. 1966 saw it appear on the International Motorsport calendar for the very first time, and from there, it continued to gain recognition worldwide. For 1972, it was screened in colour television across Asia alongside select European countries as a half-hour film. And by 1973, there was a telecast with live commentary and reporting. By this point, it was becoming abundantly clear that the race was headed on an upward trajectory, and surely that meant that the event's future would be secure, right? Well, apparently not, because in October 1973, just 4 months after the 1973 edition, the Singapore Sports Council informed the race organisers, the Singapore Motorsports Club, that they had decided to discontinue the event on safety grounds. And it's not really difficult to see why. The 1970s were easily a dangerous time for motorsport. Cars and bikes were getting faster and safety features were struggling to catch up. The circuit's high-speed nature already made it dangerous from the outset. Faster cars and bikes just made the risk increase exponentially, which wasn't helped by a general lack of safety features to begin with. Not only was there a lack of runoff, there were barely any true barriers at all. Only certain corners of the track were lined with Armco barriers, and further complicating matters were ravines located by the side of the track, meaning that any minor mistake a driver or rider made could prove very costly or even fatal. By 1973, the track had claimed a total of 7 lives, with 4 drivers, 2 riders, and a track marshal perishing. To put things into perspective, in the same period of time, 3 lives were lost at the Circuit de Monaco, while 4 were lost at the Macau Guia Circuit, which really goes to show just how dangerous the track really was. In 1974, the Singapore Motorsports Club made an attempt to revive the event. Unfortunately, as we all know, that never came to fruition. However, it must be recognized that even if the race wasn't discontinued after 1973, the reality is that the track was always going to have a finite lifespan. As early as March 1970, the Singapore government already had plans to replace the Thomson circuit with a permanent track and was seeking out suitable sites. By the next year, the plans were approved and in the following year, 1972, an ad hoc committee was set up to oversee the project. However, by April 1973, the project still remained in the planning stages as a suitable site had yet to be found, and unfortunately, from there, the trail just seemingly turned cold on this project, becoming the first in a line of permanent circuits planned to be built in Singapore but never completed. The project's failure was a real shame, because looking at the upward trajectory the race was on prior to its sudden cancellation, it could have had a very bright future, evolving to a Macau Grand Prix equivalent or even making its way into the Formula 1 World Championship calendar, especially if that permanent circuit was built. But on that note, let's talk about the circuit today. The general layout of the track still exists, though some changes have been made across the years. The roundabout marking the end of the start-finish straight was removed sometime between the late 1970s to early 80s, while Upper Thomson Road has now been widened into a 6-lane road. In fact, all the way up to mid-2018, if the roads were closed, you could still run a Goodwood-style revival of the track, before Old Upper Thomson Road was modified into its current state. And with that, we've come to the end of the video. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, do drop a like and subscribe for more racing content, and feel free to share your thoughts on the video in the comment section below. To close off this video, I'll leave you with this raw footage of me cycling down a park connector along Old Upper Thomson Road.